I'm about to tell you about a woman who spent 30 years building a business from nothing, and the morning she found out her own daughter had been trying to take it from her. She made one phone call that changed everything. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments, what's the most painful thing a family member has ever taken from you? My mother's bakery on Clover Street had been there since before I could walk. The smell of brown sugar and vanilla was the first thing I ever knew. Growing up, that shop was as much a part of our family as Sunday dinners or the old piano nobody could play sitting in the hallway. Mom opened it with her sister, my Aunt Rowena, back in 1991 with a $12,000 loan and a handwritten recipe book that had belonged to their grandmother. Aunt Rowena passed away from cancer when I was 11, leaving her half of the business to my mother in a will that had been notarized and filed without dispute. For 2 decades, my mother ran that bakery alone. She worked 6 days a week. She knew every regular customer by name. She stayed late frosting cakes for other people's weddings while her own anniversary dinners went cold at home. She poured herself into that place so completely that when my stepfather left, when I was 19 and my half-sister Brooke was 7, the bakery was the only thing that kept her standing. I watched her do all of it, and I helped when I could. After college, I moved back to town and spent 3 years working beside her, learning the ordering system, managing the weekend staff, handling the social media she never quite understood. Those weren't glamorous years. I made $14 an hour and drove a car that needed a jump start every 3rd morning. But I was there. I showed up. Brooke didn't. My half-sister had her own life in Atlanta. She called on holidays, visited twice a year, and sent flowers on Mom's birthday from an app on her phone. She was charming in the way people are charming when they haven't been asked for anything yet. Mom never seemed to notice the difference. She lit up the same way every time Brooke walked through the door, which was fine. It was always fine. Brooke was younger. Brooke had her father's eyes. I understood. What I didn't understand, not until much later, was what Brooke had been doing during all those years of polite distance. 3 months before my mother's 62nd birthday, Mom had a minor stroke. It was terrifying and fast and, thankfully, not severe. She spent 4 days in the hospital, came home with new medications and a blood pressure monitor on her wrist, and was told by her doctor to reduce her stress levels. The bakery, her doctor said gently but clearly, might need to be reconsidered. That was the word he used. Reconsidered. Brooke arrived the following weekend. She hugged Mom longer than usual, cried a little, brought homemade soup in a container she definitely bought from Trader Joe's. I didn't say anything about the soup. What mattered was that she was there. She stayed for 6 days. On the 5th day, she sat down at the kitchen table with a folder. I was in the next room. I heard her voice drop the way it does when someone is being careful. I heard her say, "Mom, I've been thinking." I heard my mother say, the way she does when she's only half listening. And then I heard Brooke say the word restructuring. I walked into the kitchen. Brooke looked up at me without surprise. She'd laid several documents on the table, along with a printed summary from what appeared to be a business consultant. She explained, calmly, and with a kind of rehearsed logic that given Mom's health situation, it made sense to formalize the future of the bakery now rather than later. She said she'd done some research. She said she wanted to protect the family asset. What does protecting it look like? I asked. She smiled. A trust. With me as the managing trustee. You'd still be involved operationally, of course. I looked at Mom. She was looking at the papers. Honey, she said to me, simply things. I didn't say what I was thinking. What I was thinking was, I have been here every single day for 3 years. I built the Instagram account that tripled your holiday orders. I renegotiated the lease 2 years ago and saved you $600 a month. I know which supplier shortchanges the vanilla extract and which health inspector drinks his coffee with 2 sugars. Brooke has been here for 5 days, and she brought fake homemade soup. Instead I said, I'd like to read the documents before anyone signs anything. Brooke said, of course. I took the folder to my apartment that night. I read everything twice. Then I called a friend of mine from college, Petra, who had gone on to work in estate law. I read her the relevant sections over the phone, while she listened quietly. When I finished, there was a pause. Whoever put this together, Petra said carefully, structured it so that the current operator, which is you, would have no formal authority in the event of the trustee's death or incapacity. Your role would be advisory at most. It also includes a liquidation clause that could be triggered with a simple majority vote of the named trustees. Brooke is the only named trustee, I said. I see that, Petra said. I sat with the folder on my lap for a long time after we hung up. Outside my window, the streetlights came on one by one. A dog barked somewhere down the block. I kept thinking about my mother's face at the table, the way she'd looked at those papers like they were a solution, not a trap. She'd been so tired lately, so worn down by the stroke scare and the medication adjustments and the long process of being someone who has almost lost something. She was looking for relief. Brooke had offered to carry the weight. What Brooke hadn't mentioned was where she was planning to carry it to. The next morning, I called the county courthouse and requested copies of the original business registration and the deed to the property on Clover Street. The bakery building had been purchased outright by my mother and Aunt Rowena in 2003, after a decade of renting. When Aunt Rowena died, her share passed to my mother, but what I hadn't known, what no one had talked about since I was a teenager, was that Aunt Rowena had also left a small bequest in her will to me personally. Not a share of the business, not cash. Something called a right of first refusal on the property, contingent on any future sale or transfer. I had to read the legal description 4 times before I understood what it meant. It meant that before my mother could transfer, sell, or restructure the property in any way, she was legally required to offer it to me first. It meant that the trust Brooke had designed couldn't be executed without my consent. And it meant that Aunt Rowena, who had bounced me on her knee and called me her little business partner when I was 8 years old, had thought about me before she died in a way I had never known. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. I put the documents in a folder in the back of my filing cabinet and went to work the next morning like nothing had changed. Brooke left on Sunday. She hugged me warmly at the door. She said we'd continue the conversation soon. She told Mom to rest and not overdo it. Mom watched her drive away with that particular look she gets, pride and wistfulness and something I'd long stopped trying to name. She's trying to help, Mom said. I know, I said. I went inside and started on the morning prep. Flour, butter, the big commercial mixer that had been making the same grinding sound for 2 years and still hadn't broken. I had an order for 4 dozen lemon bars and a custom anniversary cake due by noon. The morning was cold and the oven hadn't fully heated yet and I was fine. I was completely fine. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived at the bakery addressed to my mother from an attorney's office in Atlanta. Inside was a formal proposal for the trust restructuring, now with all the paperwork finalized, referencing a preliminary conversation she'd apparently had with Brooke by phone. There was a signature line at the bottom, a deadline of 30 days. My mother brought the letter to me at the end of the day, after the last customer left and I was wiping down the display case. Brooke had this drawn up, she said. She thinks we should do it before the end of the year for tax purposes. I dried my hands on the dish towel. Mom, I said, before you sign that, there's something you need to know. She sat down on one of the little cafe chairs we kept near the window, the ones with the cushions she'd recovered herself in a blue floral pattern 15 years ago. She looked at me the way she does when she's bracing for something she already suspects. I told her everything. I told her about Petra. I told her about the liquidation clause. I told her what managing trustee actually meant in practice. And then I told her about the right of first refusal in Aunt Rowena's will. My mother was quiet for a long time. I didn't know about that clause, she finally said. Rowena never mentioned it. She knew what she was doing, I said. She was protecting the business. Mom looked at the window. The streetlights outside were just starting to come on. A couple walked past holding coffee cups and a dog on a leash. Normal Tuesday evening on Clover Street. She meant to protect you, Mom said quietly. I didn't answer that. Has Brooke seen this? Mom asked, nodding toward the documents I'd laid on the table. No. Mom nodded slowly. Then she picked up her phone and called Brooke. I heard one side of the conversation from where I was standing. My mother's voice was calm, steady. The voice she uses when she's made up her mind about something and doesn't need to argue about it. She told Brooke she wouldn't be signing the trust documents. She told her she'd spoken with someone about the structure and had concerns. She told her she appreciated the effort, but that the bakery's future needed to be handled differently. Then Brooke said something I couldn't hear. And my mother said, Cassie's been here every day for 3 years. I should have been clearer about that a long time ago. My name. My mother said my name. It doesn't sound like much written out like that. But if you've spent a long time being the one who shows up quietly, who doesn't ask for acknowledgement, who tells yourself it's enough just to do the work, you would understand why it felt like the first full breath I'd taken in a very long time. Brooke called me the next morning. Her voice was different. The warmth was still there, technically, but underneath it was something tight and controlled. She said she was confused about why I'd gotten outside legal counsel involved, without talking to her first. I said I'd wanted to understand the documents before Mom signed anything. She said she was just trying to help the family. I said I knew that. She said, "You've always had a problem trusting people, Cassie. You know that, right? Mom worries about you." I sat with that for a moment. It was a good move, as far as moves go. Put me on the defensive. Reframe my caution as a character flaw. Make me doubt whether my mother's reassurances were real or just politeness. "I appreciate you sharing that," I said. And then I didn't say anything else. The silence stretched out for a long time. "Fine," Brooke said finally. "Fine, I was just trying to do something good." "I know," I said again. She hung up first. I stood in my apartment kitchen for a while after that, looking at nothing in particular. The refrigerator hummed. Sunlight moved across the floor. I thought about the version of this story where I'd stayed quiet, where I'd handed my mother the pen and let her sign, and told myself it was none of my business. Where 2 years from now, the bakery on Clover Street belonged in all practical terms to someone who showed up twice a year with store-bought soup. I thought about Aunt Rowena's handwriting in the old recipe book, the way she'd labeled every page in her small, careful cursive. Butter, real, never margarine. A note written to no one and everyone, as if she'd understood that the people who come after you need reminding of the things that matter. She had thought about me. All those years ago, when she was making arrangements for her own death, she had put my name in a document and made it legal. Not because she expected me to fight anyone, because she wanted to make sure I had standing. She wanted to make sure I couldn't be overlooked. I went to the bakery early the next morning. My mother was already there, which didn't surprise me. The lights were on, the oven was preheating, and she was standing at the back counter doing something with the laminated dough for the croissants, which we only made on Wednesdays. We worked side by side for an hour without talking much, just the familiar sounds. The mixer, the timer, the radio low in the background. Then my mother said, without looking up from what she was doing, "I want to update the business documents." I kept working. "I want your name on everything it should be on. Co-owner, the property, all of it." Rowena would have wanted that. I set down what I was holding. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said. "That's why it matters." We called an attorney that afternoon, not the one Brooke had used. One here in town, someone my mother had known for years, who had helped her with the lease renewal and a few other things over the years. We made an appointment for the following week. My mother brought every relevant document she could find, including Aunt Rowena's original will, and the business registration from 1991. The process took about 3 weeks in total. There were forms, signatures, a notary, a trip to the county office. My mother handled most of it with the same efficiency she applies to everything. Methodical, unbothered, thorough. She'd been running a business for 30 years. Paperwork didn't scare her. When it was done, the bakery on Clover Street and the building it occupied were jointly owned by my mother and me in equal shares. Brooke called once during those 3 weeks. She left a voicemail for Mom that I didn't hear directly, but that Mom summarized later as checking in. Mom called her back, had a short conversation, and afterward came to find me in the storeroom where I was doing inventory. "She's hurt," Mom said. I know, she didn't understand what she was doing. I believe that. I looked at my clipboard, I kept counting. "I believe that too," I said. "I don't think she was trying to steal anything. I think she saw a problem and went looking for a solution, and didn't ask the right questions." Mom nodded. "But she should have asked," I said. "She should have asked," Mom agreed. That was all we said about it. My mother is not a woman who dwells. She went back to the front of the shop, and I finished the inventory, and someone rang the little bell above the door, and the day continued. Brooke didn't visit for almost 5 months. When she finally came, she was quieter than usual. She helped behind the counter one morning, which she hadn't done since we were teenagers. She didn't mention the trust documents or the attorney or any of it. She helped a woman pick out a birthday cake for her grandson. She made good coffee. Before she left, she found me in the back doing dishes. "Sorry," she said. "I know you did," I said. "I didn't understand." She stopped. Started again. "I didn't ask you what you needed. I just assumed." I dried my hands, turned around. She looked younger somehow, standing in the doorway of the back kitchen with her coat still on. Less certain of herself than she usually seemed. It was the most honest I'd seen her look in years. "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. Not because nothing had happened. Not because the hurt wasn't real. But because holding it wasn't going to make the croissants any better. And my mother had just reorganized the display case so the lemon bars were more visible from the street, and there was work to do. There is always work to do when you love something enough to show up for it every day. We didn't hug. It wasn't that kind of moment, but she nodded, and I nodded, and she went out to say goodbye to Mom. I went back to the dishes. The bakery on Clover Street is still there. The croissants are still on Wednesdays. The display case still has the smudge on the lower left corner of the glass that we've wiped 1,000 times and never quite gotten clean. My mother still knows every regular customer by name. And now so do I. Because they're my customers too. Because my name is on the door now, in the paperwork if not literally. And there's something about that kind of permanence that changes how you see a place. Some mornings I come in early and stand in the back before the lights are all the way on, and I can smell the sugar and the butter and the warmth of the oven just beginning to heat. And I think about Aunt Rowena writing my name into a document 20-some years ago. Thinking ahead, making sure I had something to stand on. I never wanted the title. I never wanted to fight anyone for it. I just wanted to know that the work I did meant something. That showing up, day after day, without asking for recognition or credit or a seat at the table, that it was seen, that it counted, that some part of the people I loved understood it even when they didn't say so. Aunt Rowena said so. In her own way, a long time ago. That was enough. Before you go, leave a comment below. Was Cassie right to stay quiet about what she found until the right moment, or should she have confronted her sister sooner? And if you know someone who's been quietly holding something together for years without being seen, share this with them. Sometimes that's all it takes.